we want to welcome you all to our session on real cross-functional teams for creating real and better products. My name is Jutta Eckstein, and well, whatever. I'm a coach, consultant, author, speaker, and there is Maryse.
So I'm Maryse. Yeah, whatever. I'm an agile type of person involved in, helping people in organizations reduce their suffering in their organizations. And that's what I always try to do. And sometimes I introduce myself as a mensch that's really into helping other people. So that was actually it.
Very good. Okay, we want to start and hear from you first, because we are talking about real cross-functional teams here. And so we would like to hear from you. What do you think should actually be crossed by this cross-functional team? And so please go to menti.com and just let us know in one word or maybe two what, in your opinion, has to be crossed when we talk about cross-functional teams. And now, not only when we talk about it, but also cross-functional teams is a term that's used a lot in an agile context. So what is that crossing? Okay.
There we go.
It depends. Of course,
Lovely.
always. So skills, departments, knowledge, goals, culture. Skills is standing out a bit more. The border to users. And then again, skill sharing, capabilities, which is maybe a bit like skills.
Well, there's a lot of things coming in. Culture, yeah.
Yeah. The skills seems to be like the big thing.
Yeah. Working together, absolutely.
Yeah. Resources. What is that? Tasks, all the expertise needed, gender, purpose, roadmap. Did I just see ownership?
Yeah.
What do you see, Maryse?
Yeah, it's indeed the skills and the competences, the knowledge, the functions.
The collaboration. I haven't seen that before, but this is standing out now. Yeah. And also mutual respect. I like that.
Yes. And what about gender and all kind of other things? I mean, maybe we just don't have to do the session. They already are all inspired.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
This is really, really cool. So you can keep bringing your ideas. We will move on. Thank you so much so far. And the thing is, we talk a lot about cross-functional teams in Agile. However, what we see, what's most often meant with that is something like people from backend and front end working together, or developers and testers are working together. So this is a lot like departments, skills, capabilities, what we have seen before. And that's kind of what people focus on the most in Agile when they refer to cross-functional teams. However, you probably thought so. That's why you brought up all these great topics. We want to focus on something else.
And you saw that coming, of course, that cross-functional in our idea and what we'd like to inspire you with is that cross-functional is so much more than just a functional part. It is indeed many of these things that you put in the Menti. It's stuff like diversity, inclusion, it's gender, it's race, it's neurodiversity, it's many things. And why is that? Because what we'd like you to think about is that, well, what is shown here on the left-hand side, the picture of the three men building a product. We assume that this is a development team developing a product. It's a very non-diverse team, what you see here. And of course, it's only shown for the purpose of this session. And we have no judgment on itself on this team. But this being a very non-diverse team, at least from the looks of it, we figured if you really want to build a truly cross-functional product, a product being used in a market, in a world around us that is inhabited by so many more people than white, well, males of say between 20 and 40 years of age, if you really want a product team to build a product that is diverse and inclusive and can be used for a population, well, that is shown on the right hand side, on the picture on the right hand side, that consists of so many more tastes, so to speak, than is only shown on the left hand side. We figured we have work to do, not only on the cross functionality that we think should, of course, still be there, but also on the cross everything side of things. So it's gender, as is shown in this picture, it's race, shown in this picture. It could be religion, could be many more things, as I mentioned, neurodiversity, many other things. Because there is this thing of unconscious bias that even if you think you are aware of bias you might have, of things you need to look into when you're building a product, even if you think you are aware, you probably aren't. And the best way to ensure that you look at things from all angles is try and have a team that is working on the product that is diverse in itself. So that's actually what we want to inspire you with today. Cross-functional should actually be cross everything, crossed in every possible way you can imagine, and in as many ways as you can imagine.
Right. And what you maybe have heard from this as well, our goal is basically to increase the awareness of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we are aiming for. And with that, maybe we also have to make a disclaimer. I assume that we have a lot of examples that are referring to gender diversity or inclusiveness, also because, well, we are women and therefore this is what impacts us, but it's really just an example. So it's not that this is the only thing that's important, right? And so with that, I want to just start with one thing here, with one example. So thinking of inclusive products. So for every car that gets approval in the European Union, so in the EU, there are 5 required tests for that approval. However, there is really no single test where a female crash test dummy is required. So there are all kinds of things like safety belt tests, to frontal collisions, to lateral collision tests, and so on. However, nowhere is required that there is a female crash test dummy. And so maybe it's not so inclusive. However, there are also other examples. Maybe, Maurice, you want to take those?
Yeah, and there's many examples. Some of the examples we got from the book that is shown here on the slide on the top right-hand side, a really amazing book. It's something I think we both recommend. And when we talk about inspiration and creating awareness, this is a book that will, well, let me put it politely, it will astonish you, it will surprise you. So some of the examples are from the book and also from our own experience, but I am fairly certain you can come up with many of these ideas. Like the first one mentioned, this is one I recognize from my own experience, a desire to have a safest route, parking lots close to buildings instead of the fastest route. Virtual reality sets, really cool, but not if they're too big for an average woman's head. And you tell me, we do presentations. Many of you probably sometimes do a presentation or do a session, and then you get a microphone. They want you to put it on. And then I wear a dress and I can't put the microphone anywhere because it requires a waistband or a pocket or I'm not sure how to say that in English, but something on your revers, something on your jacket. So I can't put the microphone on. I once had it in my hair clip. I can assure you that doesn't work very well. So there's many of these tiny examples of products that, of course, weren't built purposefully to be non-inclusive, but that turn out to be non-inclusive simply because they were built by people who didn't even think of the option, well, maybe people wear dresses. And by the way, this is a nice example that seems to be gender related, but could be related to diversity in a whole lot of other sessions as well. Yeah, so that on this example, there's more examples on
Right.
the next slide.
Yes, I just want to bring up another example, which I really kind of like in well, in quotes. So this is from a real software example. So you see, it's about an appointment, and so people have to fill in their first and last name. Now here, the patient's last name has to be longer than 2 characters. Well, there are a lot of people, especially in the Asian world, who have just 2 character long last names, which means I I'm 100% sure that nobody has built that with being exclusive in their mind. They wanted to be inclusive. They just haven't thought of that. It didn't occur to them. And by the way, for the Germans here, I just learned something about the Luca app yesterday. So the Luca app for the non-Germans is one that you can use for checking in a restaurant, and if somebody is then tested positive on COVID, and then they will can track you down. And there are a lot of things around that app why I don't have it. However, so just yesterday came out that actually it doesn't accept any, well, it does accept Cyrillic names, for example, with Cyrillic characters or other kind of, well, non-German characters, but it will not track you, it will not find you in case there's somebody has been tested positive, so it doesn't help you then. So stuff like this is really happening a lot. Or another example with the names that I just recently came across is sometimes it's expected a last name has to be like a one name, and they're like in Spain, very often the last names are 2 names because you have the one from your mother and your father together, but not with a dash in between. It's really 2 different names. Another example that we want to show, which is really, I think, stark, which is has to do with, and maybe you have read about that, artificial intelligence and the bias that's coming with that. So this is, as you can see here, that the head has not been discovered because on a virtual background, because the person is of dark skin. And again, I don't believe this was done intentionally. It was just, well, not having thought of all the different perspectives and the market that might be here. And well, sometimes it might have to do with how people think, perhaps at the very top. And from that, I derived what what I now and a few people now call Eckstein's law, which is an organization produces a design that reflects the organization's biases. And if it reminds you on Conway's law, it actually is kind of derived from that. And it seems to me that, whatever bias we are having in the organization also reflects how people get hired, what kind of people are getting hired, which then ends up in what kind of teams do we have here, which then again ends up with what kind of products are we building, how inclusive are those. So it goes all the way from, well, maybe we have a bias here, and therefore our products we are coming up with show that bias as well. Speaking of bias, Maurice.
I was just going to say before we dive into these contributions to diversity bias. So, how does this happen, this diversity bias? Well, it is something to do with the cross everything teams, but there is other things in these teams as well. It has to do with the fact that very often we say we want to be strong and powerful, and we need to quickly make a decision, and we have to make do, and we have to do it now. And of course, I'm showing it you the way I feel it, which is also something for me. But that is also a way, if that is the way how we make decisions in our teams, in our organization, it's excluding people who need more time or who maybe do not feel so very safe in saying what they think about something. So if the decision making is speedy and strong and powered, like things maybe used to be, or like how they are done in the organization, it excludes people of, well, other making, and then understand you me well, please. That other making could be anything. It could be a minority group. It could be someone of a different personality type, the not so fast and strong. And it could also be, for example, in someone's culture. We all know probably examples of cultures that are not so strong and decisive, and that people will always say what they think, speak their mind. I'm Dutch. I can make blunt jokes about this. We're not all Dutch. We're not all that comfortable in saying what we think straight away. So speedy decision making, the way we make our decisions in a team, in an organization, can be a huge contribution to this diversity bias, unaware. Because, of course, like with the examples you put up before, these are not things that happen consciously. It's not that they say we want to exclude those groups. Of course not, or very often not. But it does happen because they just, other groups have other ways of decision making, of deciding what to come up with and what to say. And I already mentioned it a bit, but that also goes for the certain issues that is on the slide. People in minority groups, and that could be people in all kinds of different groups, tend to not feel so very comfortable to bring up their minority issue. There is examples, and it's an example of women, but this goes for other minorities in settings as well. If you're the only one, or there is not at least 60% of your, and I'm going to put it in between quotes, type in a session, you tend to not bring up an issue that has to do with your specific type. Now, the funny thing about this, to immediately counter the idea that we're only doing a feminist talk here, which I hope we've explained that this is not only about gender, but this also goes for men. If there is a session with a majority of women, men tend to feel rather uncomfortable bringing up issues that have to do with male stuff in a group, so the minority group. So if you have a majority minority in a team, in a group, in a session, this bias creeps in. So you won't even hear what people from the minority group will have to say, let alone that then you can do the decision making. So there's another example of this bias that creeps into teams, organizations. And that also goes for feedback because we're all in Agile. So we say things like, oh, we have to do a first example, we have to bring a product into production, and then we'll have to gather feedback and then see what comes up and improve. But then if the early feedback, well, in our example, it says most male users, but if we only capture it from one majority group or only the leading voice, then you will not get the diverse feedback that you might want. And if you really want to build a product that's meant for our, well, multicolored, multi-diverse society that we have nowadays, then you're missing opportunities to gather feedback from a way more diverse group of people. And of course, if you only capture it from, let's say, male users or that one majority group you're targeting, of course, you'll adapt your product and it will move further away from this diverse perspective and more into, let's say, the majority lane. And another thing that is a huge contribution to this diversity bias is language. As you may have noticed, I put my preferred pronouns next to my name. Now, that may sound and seem a very odd thing to do, but since I really value diversity and exclusion, it's something I started doing since I met a transgender person who's become a close friend of mine, wonderful product owner to work, but she's a transgender person. She made me aware of the fact that our language is really dividing the world into male and female, making it very uncomfortable for people that are maybe not that clear on this spectrum. And I don't want to dive in whether you think what you think about it or not. That's not what this is about. But if you're not in the very clear spectrum, it's very difficult to decide. And then imagine you're a transgender person and you're now a she, but maybe it's not that clear on how you look. Then it's really difficult, like for today in a big group. If you really have to explain every time, I just happened to see Anna come in. I use your name, Anna. Sorry for the example. Hi, I'm Anna, and I'd like to be addressed as a woman. If you really have to do that explicitly, it's very uncomfortable. Now, for me, it's not an issue. But if we all imagine we would all put our preferred pronouns next to our name, it would make it way more easy to have this diversity, because then people don't have to worry about, oh, would it be okay if I express that? Would it be okay if I mention that? No, if we just all do it, it would make it way easier. So simple things like the language we use in the division in gender could make a difference, but makes a difference in this bias. And we're splitting the world in two. And one of my favorite examples for the Dutch people among us, and maybe some of you know it anyway, there is the Dutch company, the HEMA, the Hollandse Eenheidsmaatschappij. It's a really nice shop. They have all kind of clothes and stuff and some food. It's a little supermarket in between. It's a really nice shop. But the HEMA made a conscious decision to no longer make a division between boys and girls' clothes. So good old HEMA decided, well, it's kids' clothes. And you don't have to decide whether it's boys or girls. And also the HEMA, the same good old HEMA, doesn't ask me when I order something online, which we'll do regularly these days. I don't have to choose if I want to be called Miss or Sir. I can just put my name in and I don't have to choose in the gender spectrum. And as I mentioned, for me, that wouldn't be important, but this small thing that the HEMA does makes it so much easier for other people if they're not comfortable with this gender division that we generally make. So language use in all kind of examples, I just picked the gender example, but there is many examples, do a big contribution in the diversity bias.
Okay, so now that you get this awareness, we would like to take a look into what does it mean really for teams. And for that, I would like to share with you a model that I find super helpful in various ways. So it's the differences in exchange metrics or difference metrics, as it's called right now, from HSD, which is Human Systems Dynamics, but that's what it stands for. And as you can see, it's a metrics where we look at how do we differ in a group and what kind of exchanges do we have. And if we go through that, I hope some of the things might become easier to understand. So we have just various ways how we work together. So, for example, or how our team is built up. So it could be that we are very much the same and we have a lot of exchanges going on. This is actually also called reinforcing. Then going further, we have something of that spectrum at the opposite, which is like low exchanges, high differences, like this bridal pair compared to the guy laying on the beach has nothing to do with any kind of marriage or whatever. And this is called uncoupling because, well, it seems if that's a group, they don't have a lot to do with each other. Then we have where both are low, differences and exchanges, and that is called belonging. And well, this is a thing you probably, well, I often refer to that to like old couples where the one starts a sentence, the other one is finishing it because they're kind of thinking alike all the time. And then we have where exchanges are high and differences are high as well, which is called emerging. Now, one key thing to understand, at least from the human system dynamics perspective, where this is coming from, is that there is no single field here. So, really, none of these where you could say, well, let's say here is where we always should be, or maybe here or wherever. So what HSC is saying, it's important to understand where are you with the team, with the group, with a unit, maybe even with a company, and what can you do to maybe move around on that spectrum in order to understand better, for example, your market. And so now I would like to dive into that. What is it that you can do actually? And don't expect something really super miraculous. It's quite easy what you can do, which is good because everyone can do it. So let's get started with the reinforcing. So it's kind of, well, we are getting along pretty well and we keep emphasizing our joint ideas. Actually, what you can imagine here already, that's probably a team that's really having fun, but it's probably not so innovative because they're all kind of on the same page here. So what you want to do is really increase differences here. So for example, you identify differences. Actually, I think what's really a great way where you can do that is retrospectives. You can really go for that, but you can also use other areas in, well, other points in time to do that. Then you can start asking for opinions, maybe enforcing even different opinions. So is there anyone kind of, or even saying like, what if it would be the opposite? So kind of reinforcing really that there is something else also possible. Then if we look at the uncoupling, then you want to go to the opposite thing, like maybe decreasing differences. So you look for similarities, you try to create common group stories. This is actually a thing that was for me one of the most important things for quite some time when I worked with dispersed teams being really spread all over the globe. And people felt they were pointing to each other all the time and pointing out what are actually the differences. And so it always said, well, the Indians, they are just like that, and the whoever the Russians are like that, and blah blah blah. And that's why we are having so many difficulties. And then what we did was we were looking at what are actually our similarities. For example, we all thought Agile is a great way to work together, or maybe we all love the programming language we were programming in, or whatever it was. So identifying similarities is then a really important thing to do. Then looking further, belonging. Again, that's a very convenient, comfortable state to be in. And again, definitely no innovation is happening. There's hardly any progress actually going on. So what you want to do is increase exchanges, especially by asking questions and using stories, coming up with metaphors or analogies for kind of pushing people out of that convenient state here. And then we have the last one, which is the emerging part, where you want to look at decreasing exchanges. So where reflection comes into play. Well, Maurice, you suggested at the beginning, maybe you want to start with a meditation. So that might be something, or you want to separate people out or take a rest, or ensure that before somebody is replying, we all take a deep breath and just kind of maybe you want to first repeat what you have heard before you go into your own reply to it. So stuff like that to slow things down. This, again, it's a model. And to me, this is super helpful. It's a simple model and it just gives me some ideas. Where are we at? And maybe what do we need at the moment where we are in? And again, the most important thing is maybe understanding that there is no place on that model that says, well, this is the place we always want to be because it's the best ever. Nothing is good if it really stays the way it is. So you really want to see what is it, where do you need to go with the product you're developing. And I believe this is what I want to share about the difference metrics. So we now go way back. I think that's time machine here to Peter Senge in the 60s, 70s.
Peter Senge is yours, really.
Okay. Yeah, well, but what I really like about this quote is it shows that tension that we are often having. So he says, like, difference nurtures democratic and organizational life. So this is what, at least in the Western world here, we often think, well, this is what we want. This is great. Yet sometimes we think plurality and difference is dangerous. And this is also what we see and hear at the moment going on, and like a lot of discussions that people are having or questions and maybe also fears. And so the key is, can we learn to respect and engage with others' ideas, behaviors, and beliefs? And so maybe this is the thing, if you now reflect on this, what kind of other ideas, behaviors, and beliefs come to your mind that we can use in order to have a real cross-functional team? So at your workplace, at where you are at, so what can you do actually for cross-functional teams? And we want to do that as a chat storm. So please use that chat and just let us know, what are your ideas here?
Yes. What are your recommendations for increasing cross-functionality, being cross everything in teams? So you can type it in the chat, and then ideally, you're already starting to hit the enter button. Awesome.
Role playing, learning culture, common goals. There was more up here. Help people to get to know each other. That's also important. Yes.
Definitely.
Make the environment accessible by all. What do you see?
Yeah, I see the role playing.
Yeah.
Can we organize it so that Michael can explain a bit on the role playing?
Oh, practice listening.
Yes. Did you want to
Yes,
have
please.
Role playing, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an idea that came up. I haven't thought too much about this subject, unfortunately. So I'm very happy you bring it to my attention. I think there are value to investigate in this topic further. I think there is a big power to imagine yourself, use your empathy to put yourself in the role of someone else. And the easiest way of doing that is maybe doing a role play where you take on the role of someone that you're not familiar with, because we struggle in our teams everywhere to have that diversity that we need to maybe produce those products or get all the perspectives we want. So by having that, understanding the purpose of your product, then you can also try to role play the customers you're aiming at.
Yeah, it's a
Cool.
really nice one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see trust, let all contribute everywhere. I also see practice
Absolutely.
listening. That's a
Yeah.
really strong one.
It is.
Then mutual communication and coordination.
Yeah, well, I think we're both amazed, and like other people probably are. Non-violent communication trainings. Yes, awesome. Yeah, the non-violent.
Fail-safe environment.
Yeah.
What I see. And stop silo thinking. Oh, this is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Speak up
Empathy.
if you can. Yes.
Yeah. Then there's empathy, align on purpose, product goals.
We need to make a screenshot of all these.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Create an attractive, safe, open-minded environment for minorities and thus everyone. Make space for all voices. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much. There's Alexandra. Yep.
Here's the thing. It's all of this.
Yeah, because Alexandra has raised her hand and I was already giving her the voice.
I do agree with everything that you mentioned and everything that was put in the chat. Sometimes there are challenges with like I said, I'm not against inclusion, but there are some challenges sometimes in teams that are multicultural and come from cultures that have values that are or in which some values are opposite. By this, I mean, and I don't want to pick on a particular culture. That's why I'm going to try to be as generic as possible. There are cultures in which women are very submissive. You are going to have someone like this in your team. In my experience, she is going to continue to behave like that.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah.
So how would you get to that person and make her to, for example, speak up or express her opinion? Because all her education was that you don't speak unless you're asked. You do not contradict. You are not confrontational, especially with a man.
Mhm.
Mm.
It depends. Haha. That's the kind of answer you weren't waiting for. No, but that's of course not easy. Also, the funny thing is, of course, it is our cultural perspective. So what we really need to do then is enable, build trust, have patience, and maybe see how you can create an environment that will not push her beyond, well, uncomfortable lines of her own, well, worldview, and sort of challenge her into stepping out of her comfort zone tiny bits, helping her to voice her in this example, what you mentioned, Alexandra. Also, I think, and that's an important thing that we'd like to make you aware of, that it's also our responsibility to make sure we get that voice heard. And it's not so much that we enable her to voice it, but remember, we were here talking about creating these real products because we want to end up with her voice in the product. So yeah, so it's but it takes time, and I think many of the wonderful examples that are in the chat storm could help here. It would have something to do with the building trust over time, asking her explicitly, but also, you know, giving her the time she might need to respond. Remember, we started off with the speedy decision making. If, for example, we're just exaggerating this example now, but it works well. If you keep saying, "Oh, you have to," you know, and now you should say something, and you should speak up, there is a fair chance that she'll pull back, and you won't get what you want for the product, huh? So it will take time. It involves building trust. It involves patience. And many of the techniques that we'll dive into on the next slide might help you in creating this engagement from everyone.
I would like to, well, first of all, I also like the answers from like Andrea said, like create common values for the team rather than the individuals. So I'm looking at it is also sometimes we need to agree on whatever we disagree on. And it might be some of the values. However, your example wasn't actually not as bad as I first feared it would be. And then I also want to point out Antoine, who said the team has to acknowledge differences and include the person knowingly. Now, some really concrete examples that I use is, so whenever we do something as a team, I try to use really various ways to do that. So, for example, it's not that we discuss everything as a team. And even if we do so, what we do is, and that's what I learned from sociocracy, we will come to a bit more on that also on the next slide, is we do rounds. It's as simple as that, but we just don't have the topic out there and say like, okay, let's talk about this. But we say, everyone, one after the other, what do you think about that? What's your first reaction to that? And so everyone also gets the time that's needed. So this is already one thing. Another thing is maybe pairing up people helps her to voice what she wants to say because she's not saying it in the group. Another thing that, well, actually one thing that I've used in, I'm not sure. I think it was in China. I guess it was China a lot, was that I used way more written kind of reactions because they felt like I'm superior to them. And so they didn't want to voice something against me, which could be like, I take it as an offense or whatever. And so I used a lot of stuff in writing and anonymous writing. Everyone had the same pen. Well, now we are remote. It's different anyway. And you can have that easier even than in person. And so just little, maybe really facilitation techniques help there to bring this out.
It's important to have the awareness of the culture itself.
Exactly.
Because as you mentioned, this is something that actually someone who is Chinese and held a
Okay.
he is Chinese, born and
Oh, yeah.
raised
Tonight.
Chinese.
Mhm.
Well, lived in the West for a period of time, went back, and he was holding a meetup
Mhm.
and talking about Agile, but he was holding a meetup, not just a talk, using exercises to get people to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
He had a
Yeah.
hard time
Mm.
getting them to express their opinion
Yeah.
for the same reason as you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's
And
cultural thing that they never disagree.
Yeah.
yes, well, they disagree on their way, which we don't
Yeah.
understand because of our lack of skills, meaning the culture we have been
Yeah.
shown up.
Yeah.
And
Terrifying.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess you love that, Marie. There's also liberating
Yes.
structure help a lot, right? You love that.
Obviously.
I believe it's time we go into some of our recommendations.
Yes.
Our recommendations for cross-functional teams, and some of the stuff has been shown up already. The role play goes in the direction of consider your persona. So often we use personas in the Agile world, but do we really create them with diversity and inclusion in mind? So sometimes it's good to just have a persona and make the opposite out of it.
Yeah.
Like if it's a young man, you make an old lady out of it, or whatever it is, and so you just try to broaden your perspective on the product by considering that the personas can be completely different than what's on your mind at first.
Yeah.
Then also related, I think, to the role play that we heard before from Mikhail, ask for different perspective within the team, and you can use something, for example, the Bono thinking hats. I don't know if people are aware of that, but you can also look it up. So it's basically you wear a virtually or real a different hat. Typically it's of color, like a blue is then you think of the big picture, or if you have a white hat you think of facts and informations. If you think of wearing the red hat, it's feelings and emotions, and so on. So there are different ways at looking at the problem by just putting yourself in under a specific hat. So something like this can help. Then, well, I said that already, anonymous feedback that often helped me a lot in the past. Then I would like say a little bit about consent decision making, not too much here. So that's also something coming from sociocracy, which is, well, first of all, if you think of decision making, there are various ways we kind of come to decisions. One is like an autocratic decision. So the boss makes a decision and we all follow along, or maybe not. Or then what's very much known in our world here in the Western world, like a democratic decision making, which is interesting because all voices get heard in a democratic decision making, but the minority voices are ignored. And if you are the minority, it doesn't feel good. Then there's consensus where we try to come to an agreement, which is often very time consuming. And then there is consent. Well, there are also other possibilities like random, you can roll a dice or so. But consent decision making is one of the things that helps me a lot, which is asking for acceptance, not for agreement. So it's asking, can we all live with that decision? And is it that if I say, well, I really have an objection with that, then my objection is always stated in a way why I believe our joint goal is put at risk with that decision. It's not that I think, well, blue is better than red or something. It is something like, okay, we might not be able to succeed together if we decide that way, which also means we are all happy to hear about that objection because we probably have overlooked something. So again, it's about acceptance, not about agreement. And I think I leave it with that right now. And using just inclusive techniques for hearing all voices and going round is already one thing. And like the having something in writing or having smaller groups is another. And I want to move over to you, Maurice.
Yes, really quickly for the last one there and the ones here. The liberating structure is mentioned in the chat, is an exquisite technique to engage everyone in your conversations and your decision making. But of course, there's other techniques. Try them out. There is no conclusive set of recommendations, but try them out, play with it, take time and see what you can do. But the awareness is what we wanted to create. I already mentioned a lot about language. That's because I was trained as a linguist, so I come from this background. I already mentioned quite a few of these things, but be aware of your language. I'll not dive into the 5 points that are written here. You can read them for yourself, but be aware of how important your language is. There is an example, if you go to a party and they say you can bring your wife, husband, partner, friend. Why? Actually, does it matter? Anyway, you can think of these ideas yourself, but there is so many tiny things in which the language is ingraining the biases we unconsciously have. If we only can gain with this session that you're more aware of your language, and the next time you utter a sentence and you think, hey, what am I actually saying here? Does this help the team? Could I phrase this in a way that is more inclusive? That is already a big gain. And as a last one, I'd really, since some of us are probably engaged in software, there is one of the things that we're talking a lot about in the community is the master slave language that we use in many software settings. There is a master branch and slave stuff. It's really, well, it's 2021. Maybe it's time we start thinking of other phrases for masters and slave. So that's why I wanted to leave it here. I could go on for hours about the inclusive language, but we don't have time and Stefan wants to move on.
So thank you so much. And we want to use the rest of the time that we are having for questions or comments or whatever.
And thank you so much that you made it possible to come here today and have this exciting talk. It was really, really cool. Maurice, Jutta, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, everyone.